Hi, everybody. Today is Saturday, April 12th, 2025, and our friend Professor Marandi is back with us. Welcome back, Professor.
Thank you, Nima. Thank you for having me.
Let's get started with the first round of negotiations between Iran and the United States, which were indirect talks, as Iranian Foreign Minister mentioned before doing the talks. What was the outcome, in your opinion, from what we've been hearing so far from the officials in Iran?
I think it was pretty good for Iran. Uh, let's look at the background. And one thing that we have to keep in mind is that when it comes to Iran, even though Western media, for the most part, hates Trump, but when it comes to Iran, they're anti-Iran, and they're trying to carry out psychological warfare and provide people with misinformation about what's going on. We saw that in the New York Times with a fake article saying that the Iranian leader was forced by others in Iran to change their position in a secret meeting and that sort of thing. This is the same New York Times that 3 years ago said he was on his deathbed, and then the next day he gave a public speech. That I think should remind people that they should steer clear of Western mainstream media, legacy media, if they really want real information. Now, what happened was that we've seen a lot of anti Iranian rhetoric from Trump over the last few weeks, making threats, speaking about war. And then we had the letter, which was not a diplomatic letter. It was an inappropriately written letter. But then the Iranians said that no direct negotiations. But we kept hearing in Western media that they're going, and Trump himself said direct negotiations. The Iranians said no direct negotiations. It will be just like before. During the Biden years, we had indirect negotiations. As uh, you recall, 3 years ago, for example, the weeks of negotiations that took place in Vienna over the nuclear program, and I was there during the whole time as a media advisor, they were all indirect negotiations. So nothing new happened today. It was a continuation of indirect negotiations. So Trump wanted direct negotiations, Iran said indirect negotiations. Trump sent the message through the Emirates. Iran said that the talks must take place in Oman. And there too, the Americans had to concede. And the reason is that Iran has much better relations with Oman, and the Americans have much better relations with Emirates. Now, some may say, what difference does this make? But it makes a lot of difference. The symbolism is important. Anyone who does business, anyone who buys or sells a house, everyone knows that these things matter. If you uh, speak from a position of weakness, you're going to have difficulty at the negotiating table. If you speak from a position of strength, it has an impact at the negotiating table. So these two issues were resolved in a way in which was acceptable to the Iranians. So the direct negotiations that the Americans were demanding did not happen, and the indirect negotiations took place in Oman. Then the Iranians gave the Americans, I think, a consolation prize at the end of the negotiations when they were leaving. Uh, Wetkoff on the one hand and Dr. Arakchi, the Iranian foreign minister, they briefly met, and there were just a brief hello and goodbye. So it had nothing to do with the talks. So that I think was a big plus for Iran. Then, from what we heard from the Iranian foreign minister, uh, the discussion was not about uh, Iran's uh, conventional military capability, because Iran said that is not going to be discussed. And it was not about Iran's regional alliances, which again, Iran said it is not going to negotiate. And from what Dr. Arakchi said, there were no threats made by the American side. So he seemed to indicate that it was constructive so far. But that really doesn't say a great deal, because we haven't entered the substance of the negotiations yet. So right now they're uh, they're discussing, and I think next week they'll continue to be discussing, I guess, a general framework so that after that they can begin the serious discussions. So mothballing Iran's peaceful nuclear program is off the table. If you look at this, up to now, this is all good for Iran, and it shows that the United States, up to now, is behaving very differently than what we've been hearing in the last few weeks. So Iran's steadfast position has achieved results. That doesn't mean that we're going to have an agreement, and it doesn't mean that there won't be major differences down the road. But so far, it's very different from what the Western media and what those who Western elites were trying to. It was very different from the narrative that they were producing and through which they were trying to intimidate Iranians and tell the international community that Iran is going to have to back down and that Iran is intimidated, as the fake New York Times article also tried to convey that message. So far it's good.
Yeah. Here is what the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said, that both sides want a deal in a short term and not fruitless negotiations that drag on for months and years. But this won't be easy. This is the key, that this won't be easy. Why he believes that is not going to be easy to reach that? If the Trump administration, do you think that he's considering what has happened between the United States and Russia, or he sees the difficulties of the deal, that they have to negotiate more on the issues?
I think it's both. I think it's the fact that Witkoff himself, who negotiated the ceasefire in Gaza, literally a couple of weeks later, Trump called for the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. That was fundamentally against the ceasefire. And Witkoff, in his interview with Tucker Carlson, supported Trump's position. But this runs against what he put forward and the two sides signed. And also, when Netanyahu reimposed the starvation siege, violated the ceasefire agreement, and restarted the genocide, he was in clear violation of the ceasefire. But Witkoff, in his interview with Tucker Carlson, took sides with this genocidal regime. So that's a major problem. If Trump, with regards to Iran, tore up Obama's agreement, true that Obama did not abide by it, but Trump tore it up. But still, it was someone else's agreement. But the agreement that Witkoff himself negotiated and Trump approved, this was torn apart by the Israeli regime and the United States. So if Trump is not going to abide by his own commitments, how can Iran negotiate with him? That makes it very, very difficult. Then we see Russia. Trump promised to bring an end to the war. Of course, he initially said within 24 hours. It's been quite a long time now. Quite a few 24 hours have passed, and still the war is raging. Russia is advancing. Ukraine is losing. And Trump has still failed to take the necessary decisions to bring this to an end. And then, of course, we see the trade war. The trade war, again, over the last week has been an extraordinary. It's been an extraordinary week. Let me put it that way. Every few hours, a new decision, and then shifting of position, and different people within the Trump team saying different things literally at the same time. And then after the collapse of the bond market or the fall of the bond market, Trump backed down. So uh, this sort of behavior where the US president is unreliable, where he's constantly shifting his position, when he's backing away from his own commitments and agreements, that itself makes it very difficult to figure out how to come to an agreement. Because who knows, maybe you will agree to something, and then suddenly one morning you wake up and you see Trump has posted something outrageous on the internet or on Truth Social. Then, of course, is the problem of the negotiations itself. The Iranians and the Americans have had a very difficult time in the past negotiating. In 2000, before 2015, there were years of negotiations. In 2015, we had a negotiated deal, the JCPOA. But as I said earlier, the Americans violated it from day one, literally day one. I was in Vienna during the 2015 negotiations with Dr. Zarif. And as the agreement was being signed, the ceremony to start the agreement was taking place, the United States imposed new sanctions, the Treasury. And then as we moved forward, Obama kept approving new sanctions, and so did Congress. So then, of course, 3 years ago, we had extensive talks. Again, I was there in Vienna as a media advisor for Dr. Bogheri. And we had months of negotiations there. We saw months of negotiations, and it was very difficult. And it took months for them to reach a text where they all approved, but the Europeans approved, the Iranians approved. They came to a text. Uh, the EU foreign policy chief, Joseph Borrell, he said that the Iranian demands are reasonable, but then the Americans didn't accept the deal. So it's been a big, this has been an issue for years. And the expectation is not, therefore, a swift, uh, you know, resolution to the problem. When we look at Trump's background, Trump's history, and the history of U.S. Uh, behavior towards Iran, and the difficulties that we've had negotiating with the United States, and other grievances that the Iranians have, because this is all about the maximum pressure sanctions. The United States has been imposing sanctions on ordinary Iranians for many years, and they've been targeting women and children for well over a decade. The sanctions began over 4 decades ago, but the maximum pressure sanctions began under Obama. So this all means it's going to be difficult. We may not come to an agreement, and then again, we may come to a partial agreement. We may come to a comprehensive agreement, but it will probably, whatever happens, it will probably be a complicated road ahead, a difficult road ahead.
Do we know what was the main reason that the Trump administration decided to withdraw from JCPOA? Did they say something? Did they inform Iranian before withdrawing from the JCPOA? And did they address the issue that they had in those days?
Well, back then, Trump, it depends on who you believe. Trump, during the campaign in 2015, he was saying that was the nuclear deal was the worst deal ever made by the United States, and many say it's because of his personal animosity towards Obama that he took that position. Perhaps it has to do with uh, an attempt to get support from the Zionist lobby. I can't say for certain. No one really can say a great deal about Trump with authority. Uh, if we right now, as you and I speak, you may just say Trump made a statement right now and said something completely different, and I would not be surprised. It's very difficult to be surprised nowadays with Trump.
Nor do I.
Just right now, you saw that he backed down on the tariffs and brought them all down to that 10%, and now he's backed down on laptops and cell phones and all the high tech equipment, which is basically the most important element of China's exports to the United States. So obviously, he's Trump. It's difficult for me to understand what goes on it's impossible for me to know what goes on in his head. And I don't know what the reason really was, but from before his election, he was saying that he's going to tear up the deal. He said that he wants to put on maximum pressure sanctions and bring Iran to its knees. And he did, and he tore up the deal, and he reimposed maximum pressure sanctions, because the maximum pressure sanctions were first imposed by Obama. But Trump uh, made them even tougher. So, but he failed. And the irony is, Nima, is that Trump is the reason why Iran has such an advanced nuclear program today. Because if Iran had remained within the JCPOA, even though the United States was violating the deal, it would have its nuclear program would have been much more limited than now. But then after Trump tore up the deal, the Iranians waited a full year. They continued to abide by their commitments. And that wasn't something I personally agreed with. I thought we should have restarted the program much sooner. But and then after a year, the Iranians began to decrease their commitments every 2 months. And so after 2 years, Iran's nuclear program was back to normal. Again, I would have done it much faster, but that's just an opinion. Maybe there was a good reason for that. But the Iranians wanted to show the international community that it was the United States, not Iran. But after that, the Iranians went full speed ahead, developed their nuclear program further, and we are where we are today, where Iran's nuclear program is probably among the top 10 advanced programs in the world. Alongside that, and after Trump made threats against Iran, we saw Dr. Larijani, the advisor to the leader, say on television that if the nuclear program is attacked, we'll develop a nuclear weapon. So Trump has been pushing Iran in the direction of a nuclear weapon. It's his policies that have been pushing us in this direction. His statements, his policies over the years. But today, we've seen. I mean, it's far too early to conclude anything. But today we saw that the United States accepted Iran's demand for indirect talks. The United States accepted Iran's demand that the talks be held in Oman. And the United States did not raise the issue of conventional and weapons and Iran's regional relations, which has nothing to do with the United States. And so we'll have to see how things go ahead. And without a doubt, Iran is not going to mothball its nuclear program. There are ways, if if Trump is truly simply afraid about Iran producing a nuclear weapon, there are ways to solve that. That's not a problem that cannot be resolved. And if Iran wanted a nuclear weapon, it would have made it many years ago. But it chose not to do so. Just like during the Iran-Iraq War, when the West was giving Saddam Hussein chemical weapons to use against Iranians, Iran chose not to produce chemical weapons. They made a political decision and based on their religious ideology, not to do so. And the same logic rules over the reasoning not to produce a nuclear weapon. But, as Dr. Larger pointed out, if it becomes an existential threat, then circumstances will change. But at the moment, we see a more reasonable environment, and we'll have to wait for next week to see if the United States wants to continue down the road of more rational behavior or not. And also, we'll have to see what Trump says. He may be actually speaking right now as you and I are speaking. I don't know.
Can we say for the last 15 years, Iran was able to build nuclear bombs, but they haven't decided to do that? Can we say that?
Yes, without a doubt. Without a doubt, yes. At least 15 years, I would say. Because the leader himself said this years ago that we could have made it years back. So I would that would be something like at least 15 years. I don't know the exact dates, and I'm not privy to and I'm not qualified as an expert to understand these technical issues. But yes, Iran could have made weapons a long time ago. But right now, the world has changed. This is not 1944, 1945 when the United States made a nuclear bomb. Iran is you know that Iran is very developed in high tech industries. In nanotechnology, it's probably the fourth, if not in third in the world. It's in stem cell research, in all areas of high tech technology. Iran is well advanced. That's why Iranian drones and missiles and so on are so good. So in today's world where you have supercomputers and you have simulations and you have AI, it's much more easy for a country like Iran to move in that direction if it really wanted to. And Iran has excellent missile capabilities. Its nuclear program, as I said, it's one of the top 10 in the world. If Iran wanted to do so, it would have, but it chose not to do so. And there are reasons for that. One is Iran believes it's an immoral weapon, and we should stay away from it as far as possible. And the second is that having a nuclear weapon creates an environment where other countries in the region want nuclear weapons too, across Central Asia, the Caucasus, the Arabian Peninsula, and elsewhere. And some of these regimes are family dictatorships. They're inherently unstable. Some of them are rich, but that doesn't mean they're stable. None of the countries in the Persian Gulf are inherently stable. Qatar has a population of like 350,000 people. It has like the population of slaves and indentured servants in Qatar are much greater than the passport holding population. The same is true in the Emirates and so on. So these are family dictatorships, which who knows whether they'll be around 5 years from now. Just a few years ago, the Saudis and the Emiratis put a siege on Qatar and almost overthrew the regime. If it wasn't for Iran, Qatar would have fallen. And we see how thankful Qatar is after what they did to the people of Syria. But anyway, so these are not stable countries, inherently speaking, and therefore, it's the Iranians believe that as far as possible, it's best not to have uh, a nuclear weapon because it would create problems across the whole region.
We had Witkoff in his visit yesterday to Moscow, and he met with Vladimir Putin. In your opinion, that was related to what was going on today and with the meeting between Iranian party and American party? And how do you see? Is there any sort of relation between the two meeting right before the talks?
No, no. I mean, they may have briefly discussed the issue. The Iranians, when they meet their counterparts, they discuss all sort of issues. When they meet the Russians, they discuss Ukraine. When they meet the Europeans, they discuss Ukraine. When they meet the Chinese, they discuss the Ukraine. And this is not strange. But Russia and the United States have more than enough problems. They have not been resolved, and even though they're holding talks both in Moscow and abroad, like in Istanbul and elsewhere, they have a tough road ahead, and we don't know. There's still no. It's not clear if there will be an end to the conflict. A ceasefire, of course, is not acceptable to Russia, but it's not clear when there will be an end to the conflict and how that conflict will end. And the Russians, you know as well as I, there are reports coming in that the Russians are preparing for a much more powerful punch, and that could change the equation more rapidly in the coming months ahead. So they have more than enough to talk about, and the Iranians they do their own negotiations. Something that came up recently on different platforms, and you may have had it too. I don't know. But this discussion is that what will Russia and China do if there is an attack on Iran? Iran is more than capable of defending itself, and it is more than capable of destroying all U.S. assets in the region and destroying those tiny regimes that are complicit in any conflict with Iran. Of course, having Russia and China and others as close friends is always very useful, economically speaking, politically speaking, militarily speaking. But Iran has prepared itself for over 2 decades for potential U.S. Attack. And so I think that I believe, as a person who's not in the military, but been, who's fought war and who goes to places where there are conflicts like Iraq, and when there was conflict, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. I believe that I have no doubt that Iran's conventional weapons capabilities is more than enough to make sure that the United States loses. And I think Tucker Carlson's tweet that we saw a few days ago reflects that. Tucker Carlson, I'm sure he didn't just wake up and write that tweet. He was obviously concerned, but I'm sure military people, people in the know, he's there's I don't think there's a journalist in the United States with more access to him today for obvious reasons. So when he says that we will lose, meaning the United States will lose the war, I'm sure that he's been speaking to people in the military and people who know what the reality on the ground is. So he said thousands will die and the United States will lose. And of course, it would be catastrophic for everyone. War is horrible. But the United States, according to Tucker Carlson, would lose. And I agree with that assessment. I think there's no doubt that the United States would lose. And that is what has prevented the United States from attacking Iran. If the United States thought it would win, I have no doubt that the United States would have attacked Iran by now. I have no doubt because the hatred and the of the Zionist regime and the Zionist lobby in the United States is so extraordinary when it comes to Iran. Because after all, Iran is the only country supporting the axis of resistance. It's the only country alongside Yemen, because Yemen is Ansarullah and the Yemeni armed forces and the Yemeni government are struggling to aid the Palestinian people, and they are the government that we in Iran recognize as the legitimate government in Yemen. Besides Iran and Yemen, there's no other government that's aiding the Palestinian people. And Iran has been doing it for decades. So if they could, they would, but they can't. Although I still think they're so fanatical that they want a war. But I think so far, there are enough sane people in Washington, as reflected by Tucker Carlson's tweet, so far to make Trump think twice before doing anything absolutely stupid.
Do you think that among the Republicans, the voice of Tucker Carlson is the majority voice or is the most influential voice?
Well, he's very big, but Christian Zionism in the United States is a very powerful force, and they are of course very fanatical. They're a cult that believe that Christ supports genocide. Very bizarre, or at least that's what they promote. Uh, they have, and of course, the money I'm sure for these Christian Zionist groups come from very powerful and wealthy people, and foolish people believe this sort of nonsense. But Tucker Carlson obviously does have a lot of influence. It doesn't really. I don't know what the majority is. I think that we'd have to look at polls. But the poll recently about Israel, I think, was very interesting, and it shows that the mood in the United States has shifted away from the regime, and that the majority of Americans today, for the first time, disapprove. And I think that, yes, exactly. And that is huge. The world has moved away from Israel. That's exactly why I've been saying, as if I'm sure you recall over the past few months, that I believe that Israel is finished. I think it's in its dying days, or the dying phase, to be more precise. Now, whether it takes 3 years or 5 years or 10 years, I don't know, but I think it's a dying regime because the world has turned against it. People despise the regime. They despise Zionists. They despise these genocidal people. And now, even the United States, with the mass media and the powerful and wealthy institutions and individuals who are working to keep people on board, despite all that, the majority have turned against them. And it's this is the case, especially among younger people. So 50-year-old, I think, and above, like Republicans or something, they are staunchly supportive, but you know, they will not be around for very long. And the younger generation has been watching this Holocaust for, uh, we're moving towards 2 years now. Every day is like a sledgehammer hitting this stone. It's breaking it up. So it's going. I think it's going, and all of these are really they come together. And I think that ordinary people, when they see Trump waging war, not ending the war against Russia, waging economic war against the world, especially China, in this tariffs issue is not going to go away. because that 10% is still an issue for all these countries. And the other tariffs against China, these are all issues that he has to resolve in 90 days. He either has to back down or there's going to be a lot of difficulty. And I think already the US economy has been badly damaged and it was already in bad shape beforehand. So I don't think ordinary Americans would really be too pleased to see more war in uh, Ukraine, genocide going on in Gaza, uh, and a trade war against the world, especially a powerful China, and then at the same time a war with Iran, which would be, as Tucker Carlson says, devastating for the United States and which will bring about a defeat. I don't think ordinary Americans are too enthusiastic about that.
What it seems to me that the Trump administration started with the attacks on Yemen because they wanted, the main reason, in my opinion, to attack Yemen, which was the same sort of policy as the Biden administration was doing. It was to put Iran in a weaker position and to put pressure on Iran. It seems that that plan totally failed. That's why they're just changing their mind and they're just adjusting their policies toward Iran. How do you see the way that Yemenis were capable of fighting the United States and putting them in and just making them understand what would be the outcome of any sort of war against Iran?
I think that definitely had a lot to do with U.S. calculations. The Americans under Trump, they thought that they could defeat Yemen foolishly, but and they couldn't. And they remember they said that we killed all these leaders, and some people believed it, but they never gave any names, not a single name. So all the Yemeni commanders, all the Yemeni leaders, they are safe and sound. And then the Americans, they kept bombing with B-2s and B-52s coming all the way from Diego Garcia and failing to destroy any of the underground installations. And so when they could not destroy these installations with their major bombers, and these airstrikes are very expensive. These planes are very expensive to maintain. They have to fly thousands of kilometers and then thousands of kilometers back, and so it's very expensive. Whether it's the Red Sea and the aircraft carrier and its accompanying ships, which had to go all the way to the north of the Red Sea to protect themselves. So all the airstrikes have to be conducted from very far away, very costly. All of these are very expensive. They all turned out to be failures, and the Americans have simply been bombing ordinary people, infrastructure, water facilities, and I think in the last 24 hours they destroyed telecom communications for civilians. They're just showing their brutality and their inhumanity, and that they're no different than their Zionist allies in Israel. And the whole thing about Yemen is about helping Israel carry out the genocide in Gaza. But I do think that their failure to destroy any of Ansar Allah's military underground military installations, I think, is a major part of their calculation because Iran has infinitely more underground installations, far more advanced technology, a huge arsenal of missiles and drones and torpedoes and all sorts of things. If the Iranians get into a fight, they have these underground bases are all over the country, and they would just wipe out the everything in this region. The Americans know that, and therefore I think that is a big part of their calculation. But again, we cannot rule out conflict because the fanaticism of Zionism is you watch it every day on TV. The slaughter of babies every day, never ending, and no protests from the media. Not a single Western diplomat resigning, not a single government official uh, resigning. It just shows how you know the what the political elites in the West are like. So we can't rule out conflict. Iran has to remain vigilant. The whole axis of resistance has to remain vigilant. But I think that so far what we've seen today, from what we've seen so far, it shows that the Americans recognize Iran is in a very powerful position. I think you muted yourself.
Yeah, we've learned from the Iranian team that there's going to be a second meeting in the next Saturday to talk and again to discuss the issue. Do you think that they're still thinking of having a common ground to build on, or they know what would be the common ground already? Then they're gonna be have much more of the technical teams coming in and finding their sort of talks together.
Well, from what Dr. Arokchi said in his interview, the next meeting will be an extension of today's meeting, and that will create some sort of, let's say, foundation for which the actual negotiations over the nuclear program and the sanctions regime take place. So I think that if the next, if my, this is my understanding, if the next meeting next week is similar to today, and the Americans continue to behave reasonably, then after that, the issues of sanctions and the issues of safeguards and that sort of thing will become the key topics for discussion.
And the the case of Europe and European countries is so much important. We know that in JCPOA we had Russia and China together with European countries as well. How does Iran see right now Europe and European countries? Does Iran consider a substantial role on the part of Europeans, or they're going to be out of the talks between the United States and Iran? It's just between Iran and the United States.
Well, you know I think that's a very good question. I think the Europeans have become irrelevant uh, over the past few years, and we saw that in Ukraine. We saw that the way in which they reacted when Trump left the JCPOA when he tore up the deal. They have shown themselves to be completely incapable of making decisions. And now they're grumbling about Ukraine and they're constantly speaking about how they should take a different path and be independent of the United States. But we really haven't seen anything happen. People like President Putin have said that he said that he doesn't believe that they'll be able to shift that they will shift away from the United States. They'll be a faithful poodle. I don't remember the exact terms that he used, the phrase that he used, but that's basically what he was saying a few weeks ago. Um, it all depends. It depends on the Europeans. At the moment, I don't think that the Europeans really matter. They have shown themselves to be complicit with the United States in supporting genocide. They have as much blood on their hands in this Holocaust in Gaza, the blood, the slaughter in Lebanon, the dirty war in Syria, the uh, airstrikes in Yemen, which the British, with their one or two planes, I guess, they're involved as well. And apparently, others have been involved in Yemen too. And I don't just mean Qatar and Saudi and the Emirates, but even other European countries. Apparently, the Italians have been involved in one way or another. So, so far, I don't think there's any sign that the Europeans can take an independent stance. The Iranians are very close to both the Russians and the Chinese. In fact, this trade war or this tariff war has moved China closer to Iran, sort of like the Ukraine war, where that tilted Russia towards Iran. Iran helped the Russians. Now we see the Chinese tilting towards Iran. There's good evidence of that that we've seen over the past few days. But and before the past few days, the past few weeks, I think the Chinese were expecting a lot of this in one form or another. But in any case, the relationship with China and Russia is very good. Uh, I don't think at the moment the Europeans are relevant, but nothing is impossible.
Just to wrap up this session, Professor Marandi, when it comes to the conflict in Ukraine, and we hear the Russian officials are talking about the issues, the problems that they're facing in terms of the policy coming from Europe, from the European countries, they always mention the United Kingdom and the British government, British intelligence, and all of that. Do you think that the role of the British government and British intelligence is the same way that Russia is mentioning for Ukraine, but in the direction of the Israel? Are they running the show to help Israel in Europe?
Oh, absolutely. The British regime is particularly sinister, uh, and they gave a lot of assistance to the Israeli regime over Gaza, and they've been trying very hard to undermine Hezbollah in Lebanon, and they are involved in the airstrikes in Yemen, even though they don't have a credible air force, but they want to be there, and the British have always, and this I know because I've spoken to European diplomats about this. The British have always tried to prevent Iran's relationship from improving with European countries, especially when the British were inside the EU. In Brussels, the British always had someone in Brussels whose main objective when it came to our region was to prevent any sort of decent and meaningful relationship between Iran and European states. And that's the role that they play today as well.
Thank you so much, Professor Marandi, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Always an honor, Nima. Thank you very much.